The self dissolves, when the self slips away. What happens in the brain when you feel like you're no longer you? Not a breakdown, not confusion, but a curious, radiant disappearance. The dissolving of the ego, the boundary between self and world, the sudden vanishing of I into something infinite. For centuries, mystics, monks, and seekers spoke of this place. They called it samadhi, nirvana, ego death. They spoke of merging with the divine, becoming the sky, touching the absolute. But now, it's showing up in brain scans. In the humming silence of an MRI chamber, scientists are beginning to witness, in real time, what happens when consciousness unhooks from the illusion of identity. And what they're finding is nothing short of miraculous. It begins with the default mode network, a term no monk ever used, a structure no mystic could name. And yet, it may be the very mechanism behind the voice in your head. The one that says, "This is me, this is my life, this is my story." The default mode network, or DMN, is a collection of brain regions that light up when you're daydreaming, thinking about yourself, reliving the past, or projecting into the future. It's the mental narrator, the one tying your life into a neat little arc. The DMN is deeply active when the mind is turned inward. And crucially, it's less active when we're fully present, deeply focused, or absorbed in flow. But something extraordinary happens when mystical states arrive. Whether triggered by deep meditation, sacred chanting, psychedelic journeys, or spontaneous spiritual awakening, the DMN doesn't just quiet down, it collapses. Studies on experienced meditators, Tibetan monks with thousands of hours on the cushion, show a dramatic suppression of DMN activity during peak meditative absorption. Long-term mindfulness practitioners report the same thing: a profound shift in perception and a simultaneous drop in DMN coherence. Psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, has a similar effect. Under its influence, the brain enters a hyper-connected state. But the DMN, the hub of self-referential thought, dissolves into background noise. And as it fades, so does the boundary between me and everything else. People describe it in hauntingly similar terms. I was everything and nothing. There was no self, no separation. I became the entire universe watching itself. What's astonishing is that these descriptions, drawn from psychedelic users, deep meditators, and near-death experiencers, echo across traditions, cultures, and centuries. And now, the scans agree. Functional MRI studies show that during these ego-dissolving states, the brain reorganizes. The usual hubs of identity, memory, and narrative loosen their grip. Instead of isolated regions lighting up, the brain becomes integrated. Networks that rarely speak to one another begin to sing in harmony. It's as if the orchestra stopped following the conductor and started playing a deeper, ancient symphony on its own. What does this mean? It suggests that the self, this stable, ongoing I we hold so tightly, is more of a habit than a fact, a useful fiction, a brilliant survival tool, but not the ultimate reality. And under the right conditions, silence, surrender, or serotonin analogs, that fiction crumbles. And what remains is something vast, something unnameable. Something science is only just beginning to glimpse. Let's ask the question most scientists don't dare to speak aloud. If the sense of self can dissolve, and if its neural signatures can vanish during mystical states, then what exactly are we? Not in the poetic sense, not as a metaphor, but biologically, mechanistically, existentially. What is this I we cling to? If it can be stripped away in a moment of deep silence, a single breath beneath a psilocybin sky, or a flash of light in an MRI scanner? The data points are lining up. When the default mode network goes quiet, a person doesn't become less conscious. They become more awake, more open, more present, more connected to the totality of existence. In fact, many report these states as the most real experiences of their lives. And this is where science starts to wobble. Because how do you reconcile the collapse of ego, a neural network going offline, with an expansion of awareness? How do you explain the disappearance of self alongside the deepest sense of being? These are not mere anomalies. They are reliable, repeatable phenomena, increasingly mapped in labs around the world. Let's talk about the entropic brain theory. Robin Carhart Harris, one of the leading researchers in psychedelic neuroscience, proposes that the brain usually operates in a highly ordered state, tightly governed by habitual neural pathways. This order is useful. It gives rise to our sense of self, our routines, our cognitive filters. But it also limits us. Psychedelics, meditation, breathwork, they all disrupt this order. They increase entropy, flexibility, and neural connectivity. In other words, they temporarily loosen the grip of the ego's architecture. And in that loosened state, people report mystical unity, timelessness, peace, terror, bliss, and often transformation. The implications are enormous, not just for mental health, though psychedelic-assisted therapy is already showing promise for depression, PTSD, and addiction, but for our fundamental understanding of reality. Because if dissolving the self expands awareness, then maybe the self isn't the source of consciousness. Maybe it's the filter. Maybe what we call I is just a lens, a narrowing of the infinite field into a manageable human frame, useful, but not essential. So when that lens cracks, in a monastery, a medicine ceremony, or a medical lab, something bigger floods in. Not hallucination, revelation. Of course, not everyone agrees. Skeptics say these experiences are just side effects. A brain on drugs, a mind gone haywire, neurons misfiring in beautiful chaos. But the consistency of these reports, the recurring themes across cultures, the way people return changed, more compassionate, more open, less afraid of death. It begs the question, are mystical states just beautiful illusions? Or are they truths glimpsed through the cracks of the neural cage? Is the self a protective shell we build to survive, or a veil we must lift to truly live? This is where neuroscience begins to flirt with the sacred, not because it wants to, but because the data leaves it no choice. When you measure what the mind experiences in moments of self-dissolution, you find not chaos, but coherence, not delusion, but depth. And beneath the rhythms of the brain, you find something that science still can't measure, but every mystic has named: a presence, a silence, a boundless being that does not think, does not strive, only watches. It is here, in the stillness beyond the scan, that many feel they've met something, not outside themselves, but beneath the self entirely, training the brain to dissolve the self. If the brain can be rewired to sustain mystical states, to enter that place beyond the self not just once, but again and again, then we must ask, can transcendence be trained? The answer, emerging from both monasteries and medical journals, seems to be yes. Let's step into the practice, into the training grounds of ego dissolution. In long-term meditation studies, some observing monks with over 10,000 hours of practice, we find consistent patterns: reduced activity in the default mode network, increased connectivity between sensory regions, heightened synchrony between hemispheres of the brain. But more than that, we find changes in trait-level awareness. These are not just momentary experiences. The brain itself is rewiring. Meditation becomes the slow sculpting of a mind that no longer clings to the illusion of I. One study from Yale and the University of Massachusetts tracked participants in an intensive mindfulness program. As their meditation deepened, fMRI scans revealed less activation in brain regions associated with narrative self-reference, the tendency to think of every experience in terms of me, mine, or my story. Simultaneously, there was increased engagement in areas related to present moment awareness, raw sensory experience unfiltered by egoic interpretation. It was as if the brain was shifting from "I am the center of the world" to simply "there is only the world." No protagonist, just presence. And this mirrors ancient traditions. In Dzogchen, a form of Tibetan Buddhism, the practice is not to build a better self, but to see through the self entirely. The practitioner is guided to recognize awareness as it is, non-dual, spacious, unborn. When this is glimpsed, even for a moment, the boundary between subject and object disappears. Science now has a term for this: non-dual awareness, and it's measurable. EEG studies show unique brainwave patterns in experienced non-dual meditators, including increased gamma wave synchrony, linked to high-level integration across the brain. These states are stable, clear, deeply peaceful, and profoundly transformative. Here's what's most intriguing. These states, cultivated through years of disciplined practice, mirror the same brain patterns observed during psychedelic experiences. It's as if two very different roads, one ceremonial, one chemical, are leading to the same mountain. And at the summit, ego death, mystical unity, the dissolution of the self into a vast, interconnected field of consciousness. Which brings us to a provocative hypothesis. Maybe the human brain is built for transcendence. Maybe the capacity to step beyond the ego is not an aberration, but a feature, a latent capability that, once activated, rewrites our very sense of reality. This would explain why these experiences are described as coming home,
why they carry such emotional weight, and why they so often lead to lasting transformation.
Because something deep within us remembers, something beyond neurons, something the brain can host but not fully explain. But here lies the paradox. The more we study the mystical scientifically, the more it resists reduction. Mystical states can be correlated with brain activity, but they cannot be contained by it. No scan can capture the feel of losing yourself in the infinite. No fMRI can measure the moment when time stops, when the I disappears, and you are everything and nothing at once. Yet, we keep trying. Because each glimpse brings us closer to understanding what it means to be human, or perhaps what it means to go beyond being human. Consciousness beyond the brain. If mystical states dissolve the self, and if that self is a product of brain activity, then what do we make of the awareness that remains? This is not just a question for spiritual seekers anymore. It's being whispered in labs, in the echo chambers of neuroscience departments, in peer-reviewed journals, masked in cautious language but trembling with implication. Because what if consciousness, the raw, luminous knowing of experience, is not generated by the brain, but channeled through it? This idea, once dismissed as pseudoscience, is finding new footing. The transmission model of consciousness, proposed by thinkers like William James and Aldous Huxley, suggests the brain is more like a radio than a generator. It filters and structures awareness but doesn't produce it. And in mystical states, when the ego collapses and the default mode network quiets, that filter relaxes, the channel widens, and what comes through is vast, is unified, is for many more real than waking life. This challenges the reigning model of materialism, the belief that consciousness is an emergent property of physical matter. Because if the brain creates consciousness, then mystical states should represent distortions, hallucinations, breakdowns. But they don't feel that way. They feel like breakthroughs. And they come with coherence, neurologically, emotionally, existentially. People return from them with more empathy, more meaning, less fear of death. Is this what a malfunction looks like? Or a momentary clearing of illusion? Let's be clear. Science hasn't proven that consciousness exists beyond the brain. But it has documented the consistent neural patterns associated with mystical states. States where the sense of self dissolves, yet awareness remains, heightened, expanded, clarified. And that alone invites a radical rethinking. Because if awareness does not depend on the self, then who or what is aware? Who watches the watcher? Some researchers point to integrated information theory, IIT, which suggests that consciousness arises wherever there is integrated complexity, not just in brains, but potentially in systems beyond them. Others look to quantum theories, panpsychism, or ancient metaphysical frameworks reimagined through the lens of neuroscience. But all are circling a deeper question. Is consciousness primary? Is it not a thing we have, but the field in which all things arise? And if so, what is the brain? A sculptor? A lens? A dream machine? Or maybe a translator, rendering the unnameable into thoughts, forms, and identities? And this brings us full circle. Mystical states, whether reached by practice, plant, or divine accident, reveal a strange symmetry. The brain loses its typical pattern. The self disappears. Awareness expands. And meaning, paradoxically, emerges. Not constructed, but discovered. like something ancient being remembered. Like touching the original blueprint of being, the place where silence speaks, and nothing feels like everything. Maybe the MRI scanner won't ever find the soul. Maybe consciousness isn't located anywhere because it isn't in the body. The body is in it. Maybe the deepest truths can't be mapped, only met. And yet, the maps matter. They point. They invite. They remind us that the mystery is not beyond reach. It's beneath identity, always humming, always aware, waiting for the moment we finally stop trying to find ourselves, and instead, let ourselves disappear. You are not the waves. You are the ocean, recognizing itself through the form of a face, a name, a thought, and then forgetting again. But sometimes, in stillness, in psychedelia, in breath or MRI, you remember. And what you remember can change everything. Next time on the Neural Nirvana series, we explore, does the brain tune consciousness or transmit it? Until then, stay curious, stay conscious. If this stirred something inside you, subscribe, like, and share this with a fellow seeker.